Seren had never touched a king before. She had certainly never planned to. And yet here she was, both palms pressed flat against the chest of the most feared alpha in the realm, while every guard in the throne room had a blade aimed at her throat. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her hands. It was faint and wrong, stuttering in a rhythm that no living creature should produce. His skin burned through the fabric of his shirt like a furnace had been lit inside his ribs. The veins along his neck had turned black, crawling beneath the surface like roots of something terrible, and his mouth was open in a silent scream that had ended 3 seconds ago when she had done the unthinkable. She had touched him. The silver pendant around her neck was burning. Not warm. Burning. The kind of heat that should have made her scream, except she could not feel pain right now, because something far stranger was happening. Light pulsed from beneath the metal, silver and liquid, bleeding through the front of her dress, in a glow that cast long shadows across the stone floor. The king's stuttering heartbeat steadied. The black veins on his neck stopped spreading. 40 armed guards, 6 royal healers, 3 council members, and the king's own beta stood frozen, watching a nobody Omega servant do what none of them had been able to do in 11 months of trying. Stop the curse from killing him. Soren did not know how she was doing this. She did not know why the pendant her mother had left around her infant neck before abandoning her on the steps of a healer's lodge 23 years ago was now pouring light into the chest of a dying king. She did not understand why the searing agony she could feel rolling off him in waves was retreating from her touch, like a tide being dragged back from shore. All she knew was that if she moved her hands, he would die. His eyes opened, gray and pale and sharp as broken glass, and they locked onto hers with an intensity that made her forget there were swords pointed at her. For a single airless moment, there was nothing in the world but his gaze and the burning pendant between them and the impossible fact that his pain had stopped. Then Hadric, the king's beta, broke the silence. "Stand down," he ordered the guards, his voice low and dangerous and leaving absolutely no room for argument. "Every single one of you, weapons down, now." Blades lowered slowly, reluctantly. Her vision was starting to blur at the edges, and the pendant's heat had shifted from burning to something deeper. A pull, as though the metal was drawing something out of her to give to him. She could feel herself dimming. Her strength, bleeding away through her palms and into his chest, like water through cracked stone. "I need to let go," she whispered. The king's hand came up and closed around her wrist. His grip was weak, trembling, nothing like the iron strength the rumors promised, but his eyes held hers, and in them she saw something she had never expected to see in the face of the most powerful man in the realm. Fear not of her. Not of the curse. He was afraid she would pull away, please. Calder Voss whispered, his voice raw and fractured. Stay. The word hit her like a physical blow. She had been rejected by her pack, cast out by her alpha, told she was defective and broken and worth less than nothing. No one had ever asked her to stay. Not once in 23 years. And now a king was begging. Soren gripped his shirt tighter and held on. That was 4 hours ago. And in those 4 hours, every single thing she thought she knew about her life had been proven catastrophically wrong. It started, as most catastrophes do, with something completely ordinary. The morning had been uneventful in every way that mattered. Soren had been in the still room since dawn, grinding dried moonpetal into the fine powder that Odalus, the palace's chief healer, used in her nerve tonics. The work was repetitive and quiet, which suited Soren perfectly. Quiet meant invisible. Invisible meant safe. 3 years she had worked in the palace healing ward. 3 years of grinding herbs, rolling bandages, boiling tinctures, and keeping her head down. 3 years. Since the morning that had split her life into before and after. She had been 16 when Riven, alpha of the Greythorn pack, had called a gathering in the frost-covered square and ordered every adolescent wolf to shift for inspection. One by one, they had stepped forward. One by one, their wolves had emerged, some sleek and silver, some dark and bristling, each one greeted with murmurs of approval from the elders. When Soren's turn came, nothing happened. She had stood there in front of the entire pack, hands clenched at her sides, willing her body to change, begging whatever force controlled the shift to answer her. But her wolf never came. The silence stretched. Someone laughed. Someone whispered, "Defective." And Riven, whose word was law in Greythorn, had stepped forward and spoken the sentence that would follow her for the rest of her life. An Omega, who cannot shift, is no Omega at all. She is nothing, nothing. The word had trailed her across 2 mountain ranges and into the service corridors of the royal palace, where she had found work doing the only thing she was good at: healing. Not with any supernatural gift, she reminded herself constantly. Just herbs and knowledge and steady hands. The hands of a woman who had learned very early that the safest way to exist was to be useful enough to keep but invisible enough to forget. The pendant rested against her collarbone as it always did, a flat disc of tarnished silver on a thin chain, engraved with a symbol she had never been able to identify. She had worn it her entire life. It was the only thing her mother had left behind, and Soren touched it sometimes without thinking. The way a person touches a scar they have grown so used to, they forget it is there. The old healer, Marin, who had raised her after finding her on the lodge steps, had once taken it to a traveling jeweler to have it appraised. The man had turned it over in his hands for a long time, gone very quiet, and handed it back without a word. He had refused to speak about it. That had been the first and last time anyone had examined the pendant until today. The day shifted from ordinary to disastrous. Shortly after midday, a courier burst into the still room, breathless and white-faced, and demanded that every healer report to the throne room immediately. "The king is down," was all he said. Soren was not a healer. She was a still-room assistant, a grinder of herbs, a washer of bottles. But Odalise had been called away to the East Wing earlier that morning to tend to a lord's fever, and every other healer had already rushed out. The courier looked at Soren with desperate, pleading eyes, and she grabbed the emergency kit from behind the door and ran. The throne room was chaos. 40 guards formed a ring around something on the floor. Voices shouted over each other. Someone was calling for water. Someone else was praying. Soren pushed through the wall of armored bodies and stopped dead. King Calder Voss lay on the stone floor, his massive frame rigid, his back arched at a terrible angle. The veins on his neck and arms had turned black, bulging grotesquely beneath his skin. His eyes were open but unseeing, rolled back to show the whites, and a sound was coming from his throat that was not human. A low, fractured growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself. She had heard stories about the king. Everyone had. The Alpha, who had ended the Ashenmoor rebellion, single-handedly when every diplomat and general had failed. The man they called the Iron Wolf, whose presence alone was said to make grown warriors drop their gaze. She had glimpsed him from a distance once, crossing the palace courtyard in the rain, flanked by guards, and even from 50 yards away, the sheer scale of him had made her breath catch. But that distant figure bore no resemblance to the man convulsing on the floor in front of her. Now this man was dying. The 6 royal healers knelt around him in a half-circle, their hands hovering uselessly. "Nothing is working," the eldest healer said, his voice shaking. "The suppressants have failed, all of them." Soren stood frozen. Every instinct told her to back away, to flee, to remember that she was nobody, and this was not her place. But the sound coming from the king's throat changed. The growl broke into something else, something that beneath the distortion and the pain sounded unmistakably like a man trying to scream and failing. She dropped to her knees beside him before her mind could override her body. Her hands went to his chest. She did not know why. She did not decide it consciously. Her palms pressed flat against his burning skin, and the pendant at her throat ignited with heat so sudden and so fierce that she gasped. Silver light flooded out, the black veins stopped, his body unclenched. And the throne room went absolutely silent. What followed was the longest 4 hours of Serena's life. She stayed on the floor, with her hands on the king's chest, while Hadric cleared the room of everyone except the guards. She stayed while the king's breathing steadied, and the black veins slowly, agonizingly, slowly, retreated beneath his skin. She stayed while her arms went numb and her knees ached, and the pendant burned and burned until she was certain it had seared its shape permanently into her flesh. She stayed because he had asked her to. When the king finally stabilized, his eyes closing into what looked like genuine, peaceful unconsciousness, Hadric gently pried her fingers from the king's shirt and helped her to her feet. Her legs buckled immediately. A guard caught her before she hit the stone. "What is your name?" Hadric asked. His face was unreadable, but his voice carried an undercurrent of urgency. She had never heard from a man so visibly composed. "Soren," she managed. "I work in the still room." Hadric studied her for a long, measuring moment. His gaze dropped to the pendant, still faintly glowing against her chest, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "Come with me," he said, "and do not speak of what happened here to anyone." He led her to a small chamber off the main corridor, a room she had never seen before, windowless and bare except for a wooden chair and a side table with a jug of water. He told her to wait. Then he left, and the lock clicked behind her. Soren sat in the silence and tried to stop her hands from trembling. The pendant had cooled, but the skin beneath it was tender and flushed. She lifted it away from her chest and looked at it. Same tarnished silver. Same strange engraving. No sign that it had just poured light into a dying king's body. "What are you?" she whispered to it. It did not answer. An hour passed. Then two. The shadows in the room shifted and lengthened, and Soren's anxiety sharpened with every passing minute. Was she in trouble? Was she going to be punished for touching the king without permission? Was she going to be quietly disposed of because she had seen something she should not have seen? She thought of the stories whispered in the servants' corridors. People who had witnessed things the crown did not want witnessed had a tendency to be reassigned to distant estates and never heard from again. The lock clicked. Hadric stood in the doorway, his expression giving away absolutely nothing. "The king is awake," he said, "and he is asking for you." Soren's stomach dropped through the floor. The walk to the king's chambers felt endless. Hadric moved at a pace that suggested urgency, but said nothing. And Soren's imagination filled the silence with every possible horror. She pictured armed guards waiting behind the door. She pictured chains. She pictured a cold room with no windows, and a conversation that ended with the words, "You know too much." What she did not picture was King Calder Voss sitting on the edge of his bed, looking exhausted and uncertain, with a cup of untouched tea cooling in his hands. He was enormous. She had known that from a distance, but distance was a generous editor. Up close, without the chaos of the throne room between them, the reality of his size was staggering. His shoulders were twice the width of hers. His hands around the teacup made it look like a child's toy, and his face, now that the agony had drained from it, was startlingly handsome in a severe, hard-edged way that made her pulse stutter. But there were shadows beneath his eyes so deep, they looked like bruises painted on. His cheeks were hollow. His skin had a grayish undertone that spoke of months of suffering, and the hand holding the teacup trembled slightly. This was not a man who had been struck by sudden illness. This was a man who had been enduring something for a very long time. He looked up when she entered. Those pale gray eyes found hers, and she felt the same jolt she had felt in the throne room, recognition, not of her face or her name, but of something deeper, something she could not explain and was not sure she wanted to. "Soren," he said. Her name sounded unfamiliar in his voice, like he was testing the weight of it. "Your Majesty," She stopped several feet from the bed, unsure whether to bow or curtsy or simply stand there and wait to be sentenced. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair by the window. She sat, her hands twisted together in her lap. The silence stretched. The king stared at his tea. Seren stared at the wall. Hadric stood by the door like a particularly well-dressed statue. "I have been dying for 11 months," the king said abruptly. Seren's eyes snapped to his face. He was not looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the teacup, his jaw tight, his voice stripped of everything except exhaustion. "A curse," he continued, "contracted during the siege of Ashenmoor. A witch named Vel placed it on me as her settlement burned." He paused, and a muscle jumped in his jaw. "It turns my own wolf against me. My body fights itself. Every day, the curse advances, and my wolf loses another inch of ground." He set the tea down with a deliberate, controlled movement that told her his hands were shaking, and he did not want her to see. No healer has been able to slow it. No potion, no remedy, no ritual. In 11 months, not a single treatment has produced any measurable effect. He looked up at her then. "Until you?" Serenen's mouth went dry. "Your Majesty, I did not do anything." 4 hours. Hadric said from the doorway. "You held him stable for 4 hours." The curse retreated by nearly a third. The rune seemed to tilt. Serenen gripped the arms of the chair. "That is more progress than 11 months of treatment combined," Hadric added, his tone matter-of-fact in a way that made the words land even harder. "The pendant," the king said. "Where did you get it?" Soren's hand went to her throat, automatically. "It was left with me when I was a baby, on the steps of a healer's lodge in the Greythorn territory. I do not know where it came from. I do not know what it is." The king studied her, his gaze moving from her face to the pendant and back. She could feel the weight of his attention, like a hand pressing down on her sternum. "Hadric," he said, without looking away from her, "have Odalys examine that pendant by morning. I want a full analysis." "Already arranged," the beta replied. Another silence fell. Seren could hear her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. The fire cracked in the hearth. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows with a low, mournful sound. "I need to understand what you did," the king said, "which means I need you clothes." Sereni blinked. "Clothes, Your Majesty." "Here," he said, "in my chambers." He cleared his throat and added, with the careful precision of a man who had rehearsed this sentence, "A room will be prepared adjacent to mine. The arrangement will be private. No one outside of Hadric and Odalys will know." "You want me to live here?" Soren asked, her voice climbing higher than she intended. "I want to not die," the king replied flatly. The bluntness of it stole whatever argument she had been forming. Because of course, that was what this was about. Not her, not anything special about her. He was a dying man grasping at the one thing that had offered relief, and she happened to be attached to it. "The pendant," she said quietly. "You want the pendant nearby, not me." Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of something she could not read, gone before she could name it. "For now," he said, "I want both." Soren arrived at her new quarters that evening, carrying everything she owned in a single canvas bag. The room was small but clean, connected to the king's chambers by a heavy oak door that she was told would remain unlocked at all times. A narrow bed had been set against the far wall, fresh linens, a candle on the bedside table. It was nicer than any room she had ever slept in, and it felt like a gilded cage. She set her bag down and stood in the center of the room, listening to the silence. Through the connecting door, she could hear the king moving, the creak of floorboards under his weight, the rustle of papers. And beneath it all, so faint she might have imagined it, a low sound of pain, a breath drawn through clenched teeth, a stifled groan that he clearly thought no one could hear. He was suffering, right now, on the other side of that door. And she was standing here with a pendant she did not understand, and a power she had never known she possessed. and absolutely no idea what to do with either. Sorena slid down the wall, wrapped her arms around her knees, and sat on the cold floor in the dark. "What have I gotten myself into?" she whispered. The pendant rested against her chest, cool and silent. 3 days passed in a strange suspended routine. Each morning, Soren woke in her small room and listened to the sounds of the king's chambers through the connecting door. Each evening, she returned from the healing ward to find the door between their rooms standing open, a clear and deliberate invitation to proximity that neither of them acknowledged aloud. She understood why. Odalis had examined the pendant extensively and had delivered her findings with the measured calm of a woman who had seen many impossible things and had stopped being surprised by them. "The pendant is a conduit," Odalis had explained, turning the silver disc beneath the magnifying lens. "Old magic, older than anything in my records. It channels the wearer's energy and converts it into a form of healing resonance. The closer you are to the king, the stronger the effect. Physical contact amplifies it considerably. But I am not magical," Seren had protested. "I am a defective Omega. My wolf never even awakened." Odalise had given her a long, searching look over the top of the lens. "Perhaps," she had said slowly, "that is not entirely accurate." She had refused to elaborate, despite Soren's increasingly frantic questions. "I need more time," was all she would say. "Do not jump to conclusions, and do not repeat what I have said." So Seren did not jump. She waited. She ground her herbs during the day and returned to her quarters each evening, and lay in the dark, listening to the king breathe through the open door, and tried not to think about what Odalise had meant. The effect of her proximity was undeniable. In 3 days, the king's condition had improved visibly. The grayish undertone had faded from his skin, the tremor in his hands had lessened. He moved more easily, stood straighter, sat through council meetings, without the advisors exchanging worried glances behind his back. She knew this because Hadrick told her in his clipped, efficient way during the brief reports he delivered each morning. The beta had a talent for conveying enormous amounts of information in very few words, and an equally impressive talent for revealing absolutely nothing about his own thoughts in the process. Though she had noticed that when he delivered good news about the king's health, the severe line of his mouth softened by approximately 1 degree, which, in Hadrick's emotional vocabulary, was practically jubilant. But the king himself did not speak to her. Not once in 3 days did he acknowledge her presence beyond a curt nod when they passed in the connecting doorway. He spent his evenings at his desk, working through stacks of correspondence with his back to her room, and she spent hers sitting on her bed, feeling useless and awkward, and acutely aware that she was nothing more than a proximity tool. A living piece of equipment, useful but unremarkable, the role she had been playing her entire life. On the 4th evening, everything changed. Sorana was sitting cross-legged on her bed, sorting through a basket of dried herbs she had brought from the still room, when the sound through the door shifted. The scratching of his pen stopped. A chair scraped. Then footsteps, heavy and uneven, crossing the room toward the connecting door. She looked up as the king appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, his arms crossed, and studied her with those unsettling gray eyes. He was still in his day clothes, his shirt untucked, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, and she could see the faded remnants of the black veins on his forearms. They were lighter now, nearly invisible, but still there, still crawling. "You sort herbs every evening," he said. "It was not a question. It helps me think," Soren replied carefully. "What do you think about?" She blinked, thrown by the question. He had not asked her a personal question before. He had barely spoken to her at all. "Whether I should be worried," she said honestly. His brow furrowed. "About what?" "About the fact that a pendant I do not understand is channeling energy I did not know I had into a king I have no business being near." She paused. "Among other things." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one she had seen on his face. It transformed him briefly. making him look younger, less burdened, almost approachable. "You speak very directly for a servant," he observed. "I was told it was a flaw." "By whom?" "By everyone." Repeatedly. He was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed off the doorframe and crossed into her room. Soren's breath caught. He had never entered her space before. His presence filled the small room instantly, making the walls feel closer, the ceiling lower, the air warmer. He picked up a sprig of dried lavender from her sorting basket and turned it between his fingers with surprising delicacy for hands that large. "This," he said. "What does it do?" "Lavender," Soren said, watching his hands. "It calms the mind, eases tension, promotes restful sleep." He made a quiet sound that might have been bitter amusement. "Nothing promotes restful sleep for me. Have you tried it?" "I have tried everything." "Have you tried sitting still for more than 3 minutes, without reading a military report?" His eyes narrowed. Soren's stomach dropped, because she had spoken without thinking again. The flaw that everyone had warned her about, the bluntness that had earned her more reprimands than she could count in Greythorn, the directness that Riven had called insolent the day before he cast her out. But Calder did not reprimand her. He set the lavender down and pulled the chair from the corner of her room to the foot of her bed, and sat. The chair groaned under his weight in a way that suggested it had not been designed with Alpha Kings in mind. "Talk to me," he said. Soren stared at him. "About what, Your Majesty?" "Anything. You talk constantly when you think I am not listening. I have heard you through the door every evening, chattering to yourself while you sort your herbs. So talk." Heat flooded her face. He had been listening. Every embarrassing monologue she had conducted with herself, every muttered complaint, every ridiculous one-sided conversation with a sprig of rosemary, every time she had called a wilted leaf a disappointment, or congratulated a particularly fragrant bundle of thyme on its personal growth. "I do not chatter," she said, mortified. "You told a bundle of dried thyme that it smelled like disappointment." Soren wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. "It did smell like disappointment," she muttered. "It had gone stale." Something happened to his face then. Something extraordinary. The hard line of his mouth softened, the tension around his eyes eased, and for one fleeting second, he almost looked like he might laugh. He did not laugh, but he stayed. And Soren, mortified and flustered and completely out of her depth, started talking. She told him about the time, and why it had gone stale, and how Odalys stored her herbs wrong but would rather eat her own mortar and pestle than admit it. She told him about the apprentice who had accidentally created a salve that turns skin bright orange, and how 3 guards had walked around looking like carrots for a week before anyone figured out a remedy. She told him about the kitchen cat, a fat tabby named Pockets, who kept sneaking into the still room and sleeping in the dried chamomile, which meant half the court's calming tea had been lightly seasoned with cat hair for the better part of a month. She talked, and somewhere in the middle of a story about a visiting dignitary who had fainted the moment she tried to apply a simple wound compress, she noticed his breathing had changed. His eyes had closed. His head had tilted forward slightly, chin dropping toward his chest. He was falling asleep, in her room, in her chair, with her voice in his ears, and the pendant resting warm and steady against her skin. Soren stopped talking and held her breath. She watched him for a long time. The way sleep had stripped the severity from his face and left something younger and unguarded in its place. The hard lines of command and grief had smoothed into something that looked achingly close to peace. She should not have found it beautiful, but she did. She pulled the blanket from her bed, draped it carefully over his shoulders, and went back to sorting her herbs in silence. He slept for 2 hours. When he woke, he looked at the blanket, then at her, and said nothing. He stood, folded the blanket with precise, deliberate movements, set it on the chair, and walked back through the connecting door. But before he pulled it, closed behind him, he paused. "Soren," he said, without turning around. "Yes, Your Majesty, the time." You were right, Odalise does store it wrong. The door clicked shut. Soren had pressed her hands to her burning face and tried very hard not to smile. She failed completely. The chair became a nightly ritual. Every evening, without discussion or acknowledgement, Calder appeared in the doorway, carried the chair to the same spot, and sat down. Every evening, Soren talked, and every evening, he fell asleep. Hadric noticed the change before anyone else did. He appeared in the still room the following morning, with his usual crisp efficiency, but there was something different in his bearing, a loosening, barely perceptible around the eyes. The king attended the full council session this morning, he reported. He did not leave early, he did not grip the table during the trade report. He argued with the treasury minister for 20 minutes about taxation policy in the border provinces. Sorene blinked. Is that good? That is the most engaged he has been in governance since before the curse. Hadric paused, and the severe line of his mouth softened by approximately 1 degree, which in his emotional vocabulary was practically jubilant. Whatever you are doing in the evenings, continue doing it. I just talk, Soren said. Then continue talking. He turned to leave, then stopped. He asked the kitchen to prepare chamomile tea this morning. He has never requested chamomile in the 7 years I have served him. The beta left before she could respond, but something about the way he said it, the careful neutrality, that was trying very hard not to sound pleased, made Soren's chest tighten. It never took long. 20 minutes, sometimes 15. Her voice, the pendant's warmth, the lavender she had started weaving into the basket she kept beside her bed. Something about the combination unlocked whatever door his body kept slamming shut, and sleep took him with a gentleness that seemed to surprise him every time. He never thanked her, never mentioned it. The next day. But small things began to appear. A second pillow on her bed, thicker and softer than the first. A wool blanket, deep blue and finer than anything from the servants' stores, folded at the foot of her mattress when she returned one evening. A cup of tea left on her bedside table each night before she arrived, still warm, always chamomile, always in the same cup. You are leaving me tea, she said one evening as he settled into the chair. No, he replied. It appears every night. It is always the same cup. It is always warm. Perhaps you have an admirer among the kitchen staff. It is your cup. It has the Voss crest on it. He said nothing. Soren bit back a grin and kept sorting her herbs. A fire poker appeared by her small hearth the following night, the iron handle wrapped in leather for comfort. The night after that, a footstool materialized beside her bed. A jar of honey appeared on her shelf, with no explanation. A book of herbal remedies, beautifully bound and clearly expensive, was left on her pillow. She did not comment on any of them, but she caught him glancing at the footstool one evening, checking whether she had used it, and the flicker of satisfaction on his face when he saw her feet resting on it made her chest ache in a way she was not prepared to examine. That night, she told him about her childhood at the healer's lodge. Not the painful parts, not yet. She told him about the old healer, Marin, who had raised her and taught her everything she knew about plants and remedies, and the quiet art of listening to a body's complaints. She told him about the garden behind the lodge, where she had spent her summers elbow-deep in rich, dark soil, talking to seedlings the way other children talked to dolls. You talk to plants, he said, his voice already thickening with approaching sleep. They are excellent listeners. They do not listen. They are plants. And yet they grew better when I spoke to them. He made a sound that was dangerously close to a laugh, and her heart did something reckless in her chest. His eyes were already closing. She watched the tension drain from his shoulders, watched his hands unclench on the arms of the chair, watched the hard mask of the king dissolve into the unguarded face of a man who simply needed rest. The following evening, he asked about the garden again. He asked what she had grown, which plants had been stubborn, which ones had surprised her. She told him about the row of moon petal that refused to bloom until she started singing to it, and how Marin had caught her serenading a flower bed at dawn and laughed until she cried. "What did you sing?" he asked. "Terribly," Seren admitted. "I have no talent for it whatsoever." "That was not what I asked. Old folk songs, Marin taught me. Songs about rain and rivers and coming home." He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was so low, she almost missed it. "I do not remember the last time anyone sang in this palace." She did not sing for him that night. But the next evening, without quite meaning to, she hummed while she sorted her herbs. A low, half-remembered melody about winter giving way to spring. She did not look at him. She did not want to see if he was listening. But his breathing deepened, faster than it ever had before, and when she finally glanced over his face in sleep, was the most peaceful she had ever seen it. She should not have wanted to reach out and brush the hair from his forehead. But she did. She wanted it very much, and the wanting frightened her more than the curse ever had. On the 9th evening, he did not make it to the chair. He arrived in the doorway looking worse than she had seen him in days. His skin had taken on that grayish tinge again, and the black veins on his forearms were darker, more pronounced. He leaned against the frame, with a heaviness that suggested standing was costing him everything he had. "Bad day?" she asked, already on her feet. "The curse is cyclical," he said through clenched teeth. "Some days are worse." He made it 2 steps into the room before his knee buckled. Soren lunged forward to catch him. The physics of a woman half his size, bracing a collapsing king, were not favorable. What actually happened was that he fell forward. She planted her feet and grabbed his shoulders, and they both ended up on the floor, with his weight half against her, and his face buried in the crook of her neck. "Forgive me," he ground out, trying to push himself up. "Stop moving," Soren commanded, her hands already going to his chest. The pendant flared warm against her skin, and she pressed both palms flat against him, the way she had in the throne room. "Just stop, breathe." He stopped. His breathing was ragged, his body rigid with pain, and she could feel the curse writhing beneath his skin like something alive and furious. The pendant pulsed. Silver light bled through her dress, faint but steady, and she felt the familiar draw of energy flowing from her into him. "Talk," he managed. "It helps when you talk." So she talked. She talked about the garden and the herbs and pockets, the kitchen cat, and the time she had tried to make a perfume from wildflowers, and had ended up smelling like a swamp for 3 days. She talked about anything and everything she could think of, while sitting on the floor of her small room, with a dying king in her arms. And slowly, painfully, the tension left his body, the black veins faded, his breathing steadied. He fell asleep against her shoulder. Soren sat perfectly still, her back against the bed frame, his head heavy against her neck. She could smell his hair, something warm and clean, like cedar and winter air. She could feel his pulse against her collarbone. Steady, now, strong. Her arms were around him because there was nowhere else for them to go, and the heat of him soaked through her clothes and into her skin, and settled somewhere deep in her bones. This was different from the chair. Every other night, there had been distance. The chair. The doorway. A careful maintained gap that allowed them both to pretend this arrangement was clinical, professional, transactional. But there was nothing transactional about the way his hand had found the fabric of her sleeve and was holding onto it in his sleep. Nothing clinical about the sudden, impossible flutter beneath her skin. Sorene's breath caught. Her wolf moved. Not a thought, not a metaphor. An actual, physical, stirring deep inside her body, like something turning over in a long sleep, faint and tentative, like a candle flame in a dark room, but unmistakably alive. The wolf that Riven had declared dead, the wolf she had mourned for 7 years. It moved again, reached toward the surface, reached toward him. "That is not possible," she whispered. But her wolf flickered a 3rd time, warm and insistent, and Soren understood with sudden, terrifying clarity that whatever was happening between her and the king had nothing to do with the pendant. He woke an hour later, disoriented and visibly embarrassed. He pulled away quickly, avoided her eyes, and muttered something about the curse weakening his legs. "Of course," Sorayan said, keeping her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her. Perfectly understandable. He stood, swayed slightly, and steadied himself against the wall. She watched him walk back through the connecting door, watched him pull it nearly closed, watched him hesitate with his hand on the edge. "Soren," he said. "Yes?" A long pause. She could see his knuckles, white against the wood. "The tea is from me," he said quietly. "It has always been from me." The door closed. Soren sat on the floor, in the silence he left behind, and pressed her hands over her face. Inside her, her wolf hummed softly, restlessly, reaching for something on the other side of that door. Odalai summoned Soren to the examination room the following afternoon. The chief healer had dark circles under her eyes, and the expression of a woman who had been awake far too long staring at something that refused to make sense. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the stool. Soren sat. "Three things," Odalis began, holding up 3 fingers. "First, the pendant is not creating the healing effect. It is amplifying it. The source of the energy is you. Your body produces the resonance. The pendant simply focuses it." Serene opened her mouth. Odalise held up a hand. "Second, your wolf is not defective. It was never defective. It was dormant. Sealed, actually, by magic, so old and so precise that I almost did not recognize the signature." She pointed at the pendant. "That pendant is the seal. It has been suppressing your wolf since the day it was placed around your neck." The room tilted. Seren gripped the edge of the stool with both hands. "My wolf is alive," she whispered. "Very much so, and extraordinarily powerful, from what I can tell." Odalise paused, her expression shifting from clinical to something gentler. "Which brings me to the third thing, and this one you are not going to want to hear." Soren braced. "The energy transfer you have been performing every night is not sustainable. You are giving pieces of yourself to him, Soren. Vital energy. Life force, if you want a less clinical term. Pieces you cannot replenish indefinitely. Not while your wolf remains sealed." Odalise met her eyes. "At this rate, the curse will not kill him. It will kill you." The silence that followed was absolute. "How long?" Soren asked. "Months, perhaps. Hard to say with certainty. The pendant regulates the flow to some degree, prevents you from pouring everything out at once. But each time you channel energy into him, you deplete yourself further. The more contact you have, the faster the drain." Seren stared at the floor. Her mind was a storm of fear and anger, and something else she refused to name. "Does the king know?" "Not yet. Do not tell him." Odalise frowned deeply. "Soren, he has a right to know. If he finds out I am being harmed, he will send me away. You know he will. And then the curse will take him, and everything I have given will have been for nothing." Soren looked up, her jaw set hard. "I can manage this. I will be careful, but I need time. You said the pendant is a seal. If we broke it, if my wolf awakened fully, would that change things?" Odalise was quiet for a long moment. "It might. A fully awakened Omega wolf with your particular resonance might be able to channel healing energy without the same cost to its host. But breaking an ancient magical seal is not something I know how to do safely, or at all, currently." "Then learn," Seren said. "Please." Odalise studied her for a long, measuring moment. "You care about him," she said. It was not a question. Seren did not answer, which was answer enough. That night, she went to the king's chambers as usual, but everything felt different now. The tea on her bedside table tasted bittersweet. The warmth through the open door felt like a countdown. The sound of his pen on paper, the small domestic intimacy of sharing space with him, all of it was shadowed by the knowledge that every minute beside him was a minute subtracted from her own life. She was choosing to stay anyway. and she did not know if that made her brave or foolish or simply a woman who had never had anything worth losing before and did not know how to let go now that she did. Calder appeared in the doorway at the usual time. But tonight, he did not bring the chair. He stood there, arms crossed, his expression troubled in a way that immediately made her stomach drop. Hadrick told me about the examination, he said. Soren felt the blood drain from her face. He had no right to do that. He had every right. He is my beta, and his duty is to protect me, including from information that is being deliberately kept from me. His voice was controlled, carefully measured, but she could see the fury beneath it, not directed at her, at himself. You have been hurting yourself, every night, for me. I made a choice. Without giving me the chance to refuse it, he ran a hand through his hair, and the gesture was so uncharacteristically agitated that it startled her. She had never seen him lose composure like this. Even in pain, even in the grip of the curse, he was always controlled. But not now. Every night, I sat in that chair and fell asleep like a child, while you poured your life into me. And you said nothing, because I knew what you would do. You made a sacrifice you had no obligation to make. There is a difference. He stepped into the room and his eyes were blazing, with an intensity that made her want to step back. You should have told me the moment you knew. You would have sent me away. Of course, I would have sent you away. His voice cracked on the word, and for the first time since she had known him, the mask slipped completely. She saw the raw anguish underneath. I am not going to let you die for me, Soren. I am not worth that. And I am not going to let you die alone. The words came out fierce and raw and far too honest. They filled the small room like a held breath, fragile and charged. Calder stared at her. His jaw worked, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, and she could see the war raging behind his eyes. You are being reassigned, he said finally, his voice rough and unsteady. You will return to the healing ward. The door between our rooms will be sealed. Odalis will continue researching alternatives. No, Soren said. It is not a request. I do not care. Soren. His voice cracked on her name like ice breaking. I will not be the reason you are destroyed. I have enough ghosts. I will not add you to them. The rawness of it silenced her. She could see what this decision was costing him. The effort of pushing away the only relief he had found in 11 months, because keeping it meant watching her wither beside him. His hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. Please, he said, and the word was barely a whisper. Go. Serena's eyes burned. She wanted to argue, to refuse, to plant her feet and dare him to move her. But the look on his face stopped her. It was the same expression he had worn in the throne room when he had begged her to stay. The same fear, but reversed. He was terrified of what would happen if she stayed. She packed in silence. Her herbs, her few belongings. She folded the fine blue wool blanket and left it on the chair. She emptied the last of the chamomile tea down the basin and set his cup gently on the table. At the connecting door, she paused. She reached behind her neck and unclasped the pendant. Her fingers trembled as she set it on the bedside table. The silver caught the candlelight and flickered. Keep it near you, she said, without turning around. It will not work as well without me, but it may slow the curse. Soren, I cannot take the only thing your mother left you. It was never truly mine, she said. I am beginning to understand that now. She walked out before he could see the tears sliding down her face. The corridor was cold and dark and endless. Soren pressed her back against the stone wall outside his chambers and tried to breathe through the pain in her chest. It was not the dull ache of sadness. It was something sharper, deeper, more physical, as though a thread connecting her ribs to something vital had been pulled taut and was on the verge of snapping. Her wolf, newly awakened and already grieving, keened inside her. A high, thin sound that had no voice but filled every inch of her body with its resonance. She did not sleep that night. By morning, she had made a decision. She would not simply return to the healing ward and wait for news of his death. She would not sit in her old cot grinding herbs while the curse consumed him on the other side of the palace. If staying close was killing her, and leaving was killing him, then she needed a third option. She needed answers. About the pendant. About her wolf. About whoever had left her on those steps 23 years ago, with a seal around her neck, and no explanation. She wrote a letter to Odalys, asking her to continue researching the seal. She left her still-room keys with the apprentice. She told no one else. She packed her canvas bag, lighter now, without the pendant, and walked out of the palace gates before dawn, heading west toward the only place she had ever called home. The Greythorn borderlands. The healer's lodge where Marin had raised her, the place where her story had begun. The palace woke to her absence, like a body discovering a wound it had not known it received. Hadric found the empty room first. The neatly made bed, the herbs left in labeled jars on the shelf, the letter for Odalys sealed with wax, and on the king's bedside table, exactly where she had left it, the silver pendant. He brought it to Calder, who took one look at it and went very still. The kind of stillness that precedes either absolute control or absolute destruction. "Where is she?" the king asked. "Gone, your majesty. She left before sunrise." No one saw her go. Calder closed his hand around the pendant. The silver was cold against his palm. No warmth, no light, just a small, tarnished disk that smelled faintly of lavender and something else. Something that made his wolf howl with a grief so vast it shook his ribs. "Find her," he said. 7 days. 7 days of couriers and scouts and search parties, spreading across the kingdom like ripples through still water. 7 days of Hadric coordinating from the palace, while the king deteriorated at a rate that terrified everyone who witnessed it. The curse, unchecked and unopposed, advanced with vicious speed. The black veins climbed past his jaw and crept across his temples like cracks in a dam. His wolf, weakened beyond measure, could barely hold the transformation at bay. He stopped attending council, stopped eating, stopped leaving his chambers. The advisors whispered behind closed doors that the king might not survive the fortnight. The healers wrung their hands and tried every remedy they had already tried and failed with before. Hadric stood guard at the door and turned away anyone who attempted entry, his composure intact, even as his eyes betrayed the fear he would not voice. On the third day, the beta permitted himself a single moment of weakness. He stood alone in the corridor outside the king's chambers, pressed his forehead against the cold stone wall, and closed his eyes for precisely 5 seconds. Then he straightened, adjusted his collar, and resumed his duties. A servant who witnessed it later said it was the most frightening thing she had ever seen, because if Hadric was afraid, then the situation was truly beyond saving. On the 4th day, the king summoned Hadric inside. Calder was sitting on the edge of his bed, the pendant lying on the table beside him, still untouched. His face was gaunt. His hands trembled constantly now. "She is safe?" he asked. It was the same question he asked every morning. The only question he asked anymore. "We believe she traveled west," Hadric said, "toward the Greythorn border." "She went home," Calder murmured. "She went back to the place that threw her away, your majesty, if I may speak freely." "You always do," Hadric inclined his head. "You sent her away to protect her. She left entirely to protect you. You are both going to die of stubbornness, and I find that outcome deeply unsatisfying after 7 years of dedicated service." The king stared at him for a long moment. Then, incredibly, the ghost of a smile crossed his ravaged face. "You are the worst beta in the history of the realm, Hadric. I am the only beta in the realm who would tolerate you, your majesty. And you know I am right." On the 6th night, the beta found Calder standing at the window, staring at the pendant in his palm. The moonlight caught the silver and turned it ghostly. "You should rest, your majesty. I cannot rest." His voice was a ruin, gravel and glass. "I close my eyes and I see her. Not the hollow, not the dead, her face, and it is worse than any curse." Hadric was quiet for a moment. "The scouts have narrowed the search to the Western Territories, the Greythorn border region. Calder's head turned sharply. Greythorn, the pack that rejected her. Yes, something dangerous moved through the king's eyes. Something that made even Hadric, who had served this man through a war and a curse, and 11 months of slow dying, take half a step back. Ready my horse, your majesty. In your condition you can barely stand, let alone ride. Ready my horse. Hadric, that is an order. The beta studied his king for a long moment. Then he inclined his head. As you command, your majesty. He paused at the door. For what it is worth, I would have given the same order considerably sooner. Noted, Calder said. And ignored. As is tradition, Hadric replied. And left too. Ready the horse. On the 7th day, Seren sat in the ruins of the healer's lodge, where she had grown up. Maren was long dead, buried beneath the rosebush in the garden she had tended for 40 years. The roof had caved in on the east side, and rain had warped the floorboards into soft, uneven ridges. The garden was a wilderness of weeds and memory. She had come here because it was the only place that had ever felt like home, and she needed to remember what that felt like before everything had become so complicated. She had come here because she thought that if the pendant was connected to her origins, then her origins might hold the key to breaking the seal. She had searched Marin's old study on the first day, pulling waterlogged journals from rotting shelves and reading them by candlelight, until the words blurred. She had found recipes for tinctures and poultices, notes on patients long dead, sketches of herbs and flowers drawn in Marin's careful hand. On the 3rd day, she had found something else. Tucked inside the back cover of Marin's final journal, a letter. The ink was faded, but still legible. To whoever finds her, it read, "The child's wolf has been sealed for her protection. She carries a power that others would exploit. The pendant must remain with her until she finds someone worthy of her gift. She will know them by the way her wolf responds. Do not tell her what she is. Let her be ordinary for as long as she can. Ordinary is safe. But when the time comes, she will have to choose between safety and love. I pray she chooses love." The letter was unsigned. Serenin had read it 7 times, sitting on the damp floor of the ruined study, tears tracking down her face. Her mother had not abandoned her out of indifference. She had hidden her, protected her, sealed her wolf, and left her in the safest place she could find, with a healer who would raise her with kindness. But the letter did not explain how to break the seal, and without that knowledge, she had nothing. Her body was failing. Without the pendant regulating the energy she had been channeling for weeks, the depletion hit her like a collapsing wall. She was dizzy, constantly. Her hands shook. Her vision blurred at the edges. Her wolf, so newly awakened and already starved, was growing quieter by the day, its light dimming as her strength bled away. She was sitting against the wall of the lodge, the letter clutched in her hand, watching the sun set through the broken roof, when she heard hoofbeats. A rider appeared on the ridge above the lodge, silhouetted against the dying light. Too large to be a scout, too upright in the saddle for a messenger, the horse was laboring, foam at its mouth, its sides heaving from what must have been hours of hard riding. The rider dismounted and nearly fell, caught himself on the horse's neck, steadied, and began walking toward her with the slow, determined stride of a man who would crawl if his legs gave out. Calder. Seren stared at him as he approached. The black veins had spread across his face like fractures in porcelain. His eyes were sunken, ringed with shadow so deep it looked like bruising. He looked like death walking, and he was walking toward her with the pendant clutched in his fist, and an expression on his face that shattered every wall she had ever built around her heart. "You left," he said. "You told me to go. I told you to go back to the healing ward. I did not tell you to vanish from the face of the kingdom." He stopped in front of her, swaying slightly on his feet. "You left the pendant behind. It belongs with you now." "It does not belong with me. Nothing in my life has any meaning without you in it." His voice broke on the last word. He sank to his knees in front of her, And the movement was not theatrical or dramatic. It was a man whose legs had simply stopped working. I have been a fool, Soren. A proud, stubborn, terrified fool who thought pushing you away would keep you safe. But you are fading anyway, and I am dying anyway, and we are dying apart when we could be fighting this together. He held out the pendant in his open palm. Come back. Not as a tool, not as a proximity cure, not as a servant or an arrangement. He swallowed hard, his gray eyes burning with an intensity she had never seen in them before. Come back as my mate. Soren's breath stopped. You're what? You feel it too, I know you do, the pull. The need, the way my wolf goes silent when you are near, and screams when you are gone. He reached for her hand. His fingers were ice-cold and trembling. I have known since the throne room. Since the first moment you touched me, and the world went quiet. I have been fighting it, because I thought the bond would trap you, chain you to a dying king, with nothing to offer but a curse and a crown full of ghosts. But I am done fighting it. I am done pretending. Tears spilled down Serena's face. She thought of Riven's voice in the frost-covered square. She thought of the word that had followed her for 7 years. I am a rejected Omega, with no pack, no name, no bloodline. I am nothing, Calder. You are everything, he said. You are the only thing that has ever made me want to live. She took the pendant from his hand. The silver warmed the instant it touched her skin, flaring with a soft, steady light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She clasped it around her neck, and the world shifted. The bond, fragile and frayed from days of separation, surged back to life between them. She could feel his heartbeat alongside her own. Could feel his pain, his fear, his desperate, overwhelming love for her that he had been carrying in silence for weeks. And she felt something else. Her wolf. Not dimming anymore. Not fading. Responding to the bond and the pendant and his proximity with a strength that took her breath away. It pressed toward the surface, toward him. And she understood, at last, what the letter had meant. She will know them by the way her wolf responds. Her wolf had never been defective. It had been waiting, waiting for him. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out the letter. She pressed it into his hand. Read this, she said. He read it. She watched his face change as the words sank in. The guilt and grief that had been carved into his features for months gave way to something else. Astonishment. And then, slowly, achingly, understanding. She hid you, he whispered. She hid me until I found someone worthy. Serena's voice was thick with tears. She left me so I could find you. He looked up from the letter, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. The king, the Iron Wolf, the man who had ended a war and endured a curse, was looking at her like she was the answer to every question he had ever been afraid to ask. She took his face in her hands. Then, let me save you, she said. Odalise arrived the following day, summoned by Hadric, carrying a leather satchel and the grim determination of a woman who had spent 7 days researching with the fury of someone who understood that failure meant death for 2 people instead of 1. They had moved to a small inn near the lodge. Calder was resting on a narrow bed, Soren beside him, their hands intertwined. The pendant glowed softly between them. The seal must be broken while you are in physical contact with him, Odalise explained, setting out a series of small glass vials on the bedside table. The bond between you, incomplete as it is, will act as an anchor. Without it, the force of your wolf awakening could destroy you from the inside. Comforting, Serena muttered. It was not meant to be. Odalise uncorked one of the vials. This will thin the barrier the seal has created around your wolf. The pendant will do the rest. But Saren, she paused, and for the first time in all the weeks Saren had known her, the old healer's composure cracked. If this fails, if the seal does not break cleanly, there will be no second attempt. You need to understand that. I understand. She looked at Calder. He was watching her with an expression that made her chest ache with its rawness. Fear and gratitude and love, so fierce, It burned through the bond, like sunlight through water. "You do not have to do this," he said. "I know. If something goes wrong, then you will be right here." She squeezed his hand. "And I will find my way back to you." She drank. The liquid burned down her throat and settled in her stomach like a coal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the pendant ignited. Not warmth this time. Fire. Pure, blinding, consuming fire that roared through her veins and lit up every nerve in her body simultaneously. Soren gasped, her back arching, her free hand clawing at the sheets. The pendant blazed so bright that Odalie staggered backward, and Hadrick threw an arm across his eyes, and inside her, something ancient and enormous and impossibly powerful woke up, her wolf. It did not stir, it did not flicker. It erupted from the sealed place where it had been sleeping for 23 years, and filled every inch of her with a force so vast that Serenid could not breathe, could not think, could not see. She was drowning in her own power, her own potential, everything she had ever been told she lacked, now overwhelming her from the inside out. Just as Odalis had warned, she was losing herself. Then Calder's hand tightened around hers, and the bond blazed to life. Not the fragile, incomplete thread she had felt before. Something vast and golden, and achingly certain, surged between them, connecting his chest to hers, his heartbeat to hers, his breath to hers. The bond caught her, held her, steadied her against the flood of her own awakening, the way a shore steadies a wave. Serenin opened her eyes. She was somewhere else. Fog. Thick and gray and suffocating, wrapping around her from every direction. The air tasted of ash and something older, something that had been rotting for a very long time. She recognized it instantly from the way Calder's body went rigid beside her. His hand in hers had turned to stone. His breathing had changed. "The hollow," he said. "This is where the curse takes me." They stood together in the gray nothing, and Soren looked at the man beside her. He was diminished here. The broad shoulders hunched inward, the commanding presence stripped down to something raw and exposed, and desperately tired. This place had been breaking him night after night for almost a year, and it showed in every line of his body. The fog parted ahead of them, and she saw what waited. A battlefield, not a memory of one. A living, breathing recreation that stretched in every direction. Impossibly vast. The fallen lay across scorched ground. Banners hung torn from broken spears. The smell of smoke and ash and sorrow filled the air so completely that it seemed to replace oxygen itself. And standing among the dead, watching them with hollow eyes, were the ghosts. Hundreds of them, soldiers and civilians alike. Men and women and children, some so young that Soren felt her stomach lurch with horror. They stood in perfect silence, their faces turned toward Calder, and the weight of their collective gaze was so crushing that she felt him buckle beside her. "The siege of Ashenmoor," he whispered. "This is what I see every night. This is what the curse forces me to relive." Soren tightened her grip on his hand. "Show me, all of it." The memories poured through the bond like a dam breaking. She saw everything. The siege that was supposed to be surgical and precise. The intelligence reports that turned out to be catastrophically wrong. The civilian quarter that was supposed to be evacuated, but was not. The fire that spread too fast through old wooden buildings. The screams that came from a place that should have been empty. And Calder in the middle of it, 17 hours into a battle he had never wanted to fight, making an impossible choice with incomplete information and watching it go wrong in every direction simultaneously. She felt his horror as the reports came in, felt his desperation as he ordered the retreat too late, felt the moment he understood the full scope of what had happened, and felt something inside him break and never fully mend. 312 civilians, he said, his voice fracturing. "I have memorized every single name." The ghosts pressed closer. Their whispers filled the air, overlapping and multiplying until the sound became a wall of accusation that seemed to come from inside Seren's own skull. You could have waited. You should have known. Our blood is on your hands. Calder sank to his knees. Seren felt his grief through the bond, an ocean of it, so vast and so deep that she understood with sudden, terrible clarity why the curse had never broken on its own. It was not sustaining itself through magical force alone, it was feeding on something real, something he carried willingly, something he believed he deserved. "You think this is justice," she said, kneeling beside him in the fog. "You think enduring this every night is the price you owe them." He did not deny it. "Calder, look at me." She took his face in her hands, turning him to meet her eyes. His gaze was red and raw, and stripped of every defense he had ever built. What happened at Ashenmore was a tragedy. It was real, and it was terrible, and those people deserved better. But the curse is not honoring their memory. It is eating you alive. And when you are gone, who protects the people who are still living? Who makes sure Ashenmore never happens again? He flinched as though she had struck him. You made a decision in the chaos of war with the information you had. It was not enough. It will never feel like it was enough. But letting this curse devour you does not bring a single one of them back. It just adds one more name to the list of people destroyed by that day. The ghosts surged forward. Their whispers became shrieks. The fog thickened, pressing in from all sides, trying to separate their hands, trying to pull him under and hold him there forever. Seren held on. "I know what it feels like to believe you are not worth saving," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "I spent my whole life believing I was broken, defective, that whoever left me on those steps looked at me and decided I was not enough to keep. I carried that belief every single day for 23 years, and it nearly destroyed me. It made me small. It made me believe that the only way I deserved to exist was if I was useful to someone else." Tears ran down her face and fell onto the fog-soft ground. "But I was wrong, Calder. I was wrong about myself, and you are wrong about yourself. You are not the monster this curse wants you to believe you are. You are a man who went to war, because peace was not an option, who carries the names of every person he could not save, who would rather die in this fog than risk hurting someone else." She pressed her forehead to his. "That is not a man who deserves punishment. That is a man who deserves to heal." The pendant blazed between them, and the bond roared with golden light so bright it pushed the fog back 3 feet in every direction. She poured everything she had into it. Not just the healing energy, not just the newly unleashed power of her wolf. Everything. Her certainty, her stubbornness, her furious, terrified, all-consuming love for a man who had been drowning alone in this gray prison because he believed he deserved to drown. "Let them rest," she whispered. "Let yourself rest. You are allowed." For a long, agonizing moment, nothing changed. The ghosts screamed. The fog pressed in, the battlefield stretched endlessly, and the weight of 312 names bore down on them both. Then Calder's hands came up and covered hers where they held his face. "I am sorry," he said to the ghosts. His voice was raw, fractured, stripped of every defense he had ever built. "I am sorry I was not enough. I will carry your names for the rest of my life, but I cannot stay here anymore." He looked at Seren. His eyes were full of tears and full of something new, something that looked impossibly like the beginning of peace. "I choose to live," he said. The fog shattered. It did not recede or thin or fade. It broke apart like glass, fragmenting into 1,000 pieces that dissolved into light. The ghosts turned away, one by one, their faces softening from accusation into something quieter and gentler, something that looked, at last, like release. The battlefield crumbled. The scorched ground gave way to green grass. The sky split open above them, and light, warm and golden and unbearably beautiful, flooded in from everywhere at once. Soranan felt the curse snap. not fade, not weaken. Snap. Like a chain shattering under pressure, it was never designed to withstand. She woke in his arms, gasping, her body trembling, her face wet with tears. The small room in the inn was warm and quiet. Morning, light. Pressed against the window, Odalise stood in the corner, one hand over her mouth, tears streaming silently down her weathered face. Calder was awake beside Soren, looking down at her with eyes that were clear. No shadows, no grayish undertone, no black veins crawling beneath his skin. His face was warm and healthy, and the hand that cupped her cheek was steady and strong and sure. "It is gone," he said, and wonder cracked his voice wide open. "The curse. I cannot feel it anymore." Soren laughed. A wet, exhausted, overwhelmed sound that was half sob and half joy. She pressed her face into his chest and felt his arms close around her, solid and sure and trembling with something she had never felt from him before. "Hope. Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "Thank you." She held him tighter and felt her wolf settle peacefully beneath her skin for the first time in her life. Whole. Awake. Home. The curse did not leave clean. Calder still dreamed of Ashenmore sometimes. He still carried the names, all 312. And Sarayan suspected he always would. Grief did not vanish because you chose to live with it instead of under it. But the hollow was gone. The prison was broken. And when the nightmares came, she was there beside him, and he let her be there, which made all the difference in the world. He talked about the war now. Not often, not easily. But on the nights when the dreams came back, he would lie in the dark and tell her about the people he had lost, the decisions that haunted him, the weight of command that no one prepared you for, because no preparation was possible. And she would listen, really listen, the way Marin had taught her, not trying to fix or minimize or explain away, just holding space for the truth of it. "You are annoyingly good at that," he told her one night, his voice rough from a dream that had woken them both. "At what? Listening. Making me feel like what I am saying matters? It does matter." He was quiet for a moment. "Marin raised you well." Soren's throat tightened. "She did. I wish I could have met her." "She would have liked you," Soren said, and meant it. "She would have called you a stubborn ox, and then made you tea and told you to sit down and stop looming." He laughed, soft and genuine, and pulled her closer. Their mating was formalized on a cold morning in late autumn, in the same throne room where she had first pressed her hands to his chest, and changed both of their lives forever. A rejected omega of unknown parentage, bonded to the Alpha King. The whispers were ferocious. Soreni heard every single one and pretended she did not. Calder heard them too and pretended far less gracefully. "The Duke of Heronwick called you unsuitable," he informed her one evening, his voice dangerously calm, in a way that Soren had learned meant someone was about to have a very bad week. "And what did you say?" "I reassigned him to oversee grain tariffs in the northern marshes. He leaves Thursday." Soren buried her face in his shoulder to hide her laugh. "Also," he added, "Hadrick may have mentioned to the Duke's wife that swamp beetles are in season." She laughed until she cried. "You cannot reassign every noble who insults me," she told him later, wiping her eyes. "I can and I will." He paused. "Though at the current rate, the northern marshes will be overstaffed by spring." Hadrick, for his part, had adapted to the new arrangement with characteristic efficiency. He addressed Soren with the same clipped formality he used for everyone, which she had come to understand was his highest form of respect. He ensured her schedule was coordinated with the king's. He kept the household staff in line when the whispers grew too loud. And on the morning after the formal bonding ceremony, he had presented her with a small leather-bound notebook. "What is this?" she had asked. "A list of every noble in the kingdom, organized by province, with notes on their temperament, political leanings, and known allergies." Soren had stared at him. "Why would I need this?" "Because you are the queen now," Hadrick had said simply. And queens who know which duke is allergic to shellfish tend to survive longer than those who do not. It was, she realized later, the most Hadric way possible of saying, "Welcome to the family." Months passed. The kingdom steadied. Seren continued her work in the healing ward, though her title had changed and her quarters were considerably larger. Odalise continued studying the pendant and the nature of Soren's wolf, filling journal after journal with notes and theories that grew more astonished with every page. The old healer had begun to suspect that the pendant's origin was connected to an ancient line of Omega healers long thought extinct. She had also discovered the letter from Seren's mother and was pursuing its clues with the dogged intensity of a woman who had found the most interesting puzzle of her long career. "Whoever your mother was," Odalys told Soren one afternoon, turning the pendant beneath her lens for what must have been the 1,000th time, "she was extraordinary. This sealwork is beyond anything in the current records. I have found fragments, references in texts, so old the pages crumble when I touch them, that suggest a lineage of Omega healers who could mend not just bodies but bonds, curses, even fractured minds." Soren asked. "I think you are the last of them," Odalise said quietly, "and I think your mother knew exactly what she was doing when she hid you." The mystery of her origins remained unsolved, but it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a door left open, waiting for her to walk through it when she was ready, and every night, without fail, they slept together peacefully, in the enormous bed that had once felt like a stranger's, and now felt like the only place in the world that mattered. On a quiet morning, long after the kingdom had stopped whispering, Soren woke to pale light and steady breathing. Calder was asleep beside her, his arm draped over her waist, his face peaceful. No nightmares, no fog, no hollow waiting to pull him under. The pendant rested warm and quiet against her chest. Her wolf dozed contentedly beneath her skin. Soren pressed closer to him, closed her eyes, and slept.